I'm joined now by Spencer Critchley, and we're going to talk the impact of the last election, November 2nd, and the election of Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom and some others, what we call the constitutional elected position in the state of California. Spencer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Good to be here.
I don't even know where to begin, so I'm just going to start with this comment. I'm shocked that $160 million did not buy an election for the Republican candidate.
Well, it would seem surprising, but the history of rich people trying to buy their way into elected office is not that good, and I think that's a glimmer of hope in our democracy.
Worked for Bloomberg in New York City.
Yeah, he had to spend an enormous amount of money, and it was kind of a tough fight even there. And, it's not that it never works, but I don't think you can say that there's any kind of a direct relationship between spending a ton of money and getting elected. In fact, most of the time that does not work. And I actually think there's a fairly simple explanation for why that is. Of course, money makes a difference in campaigning. It makes a big difference. But when it's your own money instead of money that you've gone out and raised, I think that what's happening there is that the person with all that money is trying to skip one of the most difficult parts of running for office and one of the most important parts, which is building a base of support. So none of us I don't think very many of us are very happy with the influence of money in politics. I think some of the wealthy donors are perfectly happy with the influence of money in politics, but ordinary voters, by and large, are not happy with the influence of money in politics. But it does raising money serves as a proxy for building a base of support. So you can think of two different kinds of money. If it's my money and I'm fabulously wealthy and I just want to buy the election, I'm skipping this base of support step, which is actually a crucial part of winning.
So you don't have to go out and talk to the unwashed. You don't have to walk the streets, walk precincts, because that's a fundraising operation.
Yes. When you're trying to raise money, you have to talk to a whole bunch of people. And if people are giving you money, you have to listen to their opinions. And they're sizing you up. And that's generating word of mouth. And skipping that part of the campaigning process is really kind of skipping the nuts and bolts of the political process. Now, personally, I would love it if people were not out there trying to raise money and instead were devoting that time to actually just talking to voters. But as I say, the money-raising process becomes a proxy, a very rough sort of proxy for talking to voters and building a real base of support. So I think that what Meg Whitman experienced was not really having a base of support. She was able to buy a ton of name recognition, but not a base of support.
Do you think that her political future is pretty much done? I mean, I know that if I spent $160 million and got nothing out of it, she got nothing out of it that I know of.
I don't think she got nothing. And actually, Zach Friend and I wrote a piece on this for the Huffington Post that was called The Meg Whitman Presidency. And the idea we were putting forward there was, if she's nothing else, Meg Whitman is a business person and an investor. And spending that much money, total of $160-some million, $140-some million of her own money, makes no sense at all if it's a roll of the dice on winning the governorship. But if you're thinking of building a national profile, presumably for a run for president in 2012, it makes a little bit more sense. So you get another roll of the dice there. And
but wouldn't she have to be elected to the governor's seat of California, then resign after 2 years to be a viable candidate?
Well, she could always be Sarah Palin and resign halfway through.
Exactly.
Only serve a year.
2 years and be done with it.
Oh, I see. That's the 2 years.
Yeah.
I think that, obviously it would have been better if she had won. But I think part of the point that Zach and I made was when you're running against the likely field of Republican candidates in 2012, she could actually look really quite impressive because of the low standard for that 2012 field as it's shaping up on the Republican side.
All right, so let's switch gears here to what many consider to be a successful election. Jerry Brown was elected. How do you think that he's been governor once? How do you think that's going to affect us in the next 4 years after living through a governor who knew nothing about being an executive at that level? How is Jerry Brown's governorship going to be different than Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Well, that's an interesting parallel with Meg Whitman there. I think, when Schwarzenegger was elected, he's a very likable character. And, obviously even some Democrats voted for him, I think largely on the basis of this appealing personality. but didn't seem all that interested in actually doing the job once he was elected. I understand there's a joke going around among Sacramento legislators, including the Republicans, that he met with them so infrequently that the Republican assembly members, when they had one of their first meetings with the governor, wore name tags. So he would be able to guess at what their names were. And, I think in a way there's kind of a rough parallel with Meg Whitman there, this unwillingness to actually do the job, to sort of skate across the surface of things. And I would say a parallel with Sarah Palin. I think it's really a trend on the Republican side to turn politics into a marketing operation where you're playing the role of a leader and treating the electorate essentially as, well, in the worst case, as suckers.
Yeah.
I think that many of us feel hopeful with Jerry Brown winning, not just those of us who are Democrats, because here's somebody who obviously takes politics seriously, takes governing seriously. He certainly has had his detractors over the years. I don't think anybody doubts his intelligence or his knowledge of governing. And I think perhaps part of the feeling of optimism in the state is here's somebody with some substance.
See, that was, for me, after talking to voters, I talked to a few after the election of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and actually it was before, and they're saying, well, here's a new guy to politics. He's an outsider. He's not built into these, the old boy network. And that's precisely exactly what he was. He may not have been a part of the old boy network. He was part of no network. And he didn't know what he was doing from start to finish. And that's why and these were Democrats I was talking to. I was like, what are you thinking? And that's what worries me about Meg Whitman or Sarah Palin. People have just got a taste of both of them. And I don't care what party they're from. It's suddenly like taking somebody as a civilian and making them into a 4-star general and giving them command of a corps and sending them out there and conduct warfare.
Yeah, I think that in many ways our society has gone through a watershed moment in the evolution of complexity, and the complexity of governing, the complexity of just living in many ways in modern society has reached a point that's beyond many people's ability to cope, and it makes them very vulnerable to simplistic solutions along the orders of, well, these guys keep screwing it up, why don't we just smash the whole system? And why don't we get rid of the professionals who actually have some kind of skill and throw in a bunch of rank amateurs who have no clue what they're doing, and just see how that works? And I mean, they ask, how could it be worse? They have no imagination for how bad it could be. I think we may be about to find out how much worse it could be on the national level and in many parts of the country. I think it's an understandable impetus. Who among us has not ever had the urge to fix a problem with a great big hammer and just smash the damn thing?
There's only one tool in my toolbox. It's a hammer.
It's a hammer. But after a while, that solution becomes very expensive. And I think that it's incumbent on all of us to wrestle with the complexity that we are now faced with and to develop new tools to deal with it, to behave like adults, essentially. And I think that people who are throwing up their hands and say, well, the hell with it, throw in somebody who's emotionally appealing but has no background whatsoever, I think they're going to regret that very soon.
My favorite are politicians who have 4, 8, 12 years under their belt, and they say the system is broken. The system is broken. Well, you've been part of the system for a long time. Then why don't you do something to fix it?
Sure. I think politicians have to accept a huge amount of the responsibility for voters' frustration. I think that many of the angry voters we see yelling on TV, it's easy to disagree with them, and it's easy to think some of them are fools. But at bottom, I don't think they're wrong. They're not wrong to be angry with the way the system has gone. And I think that politicians of many persuasions have been pandering to voters, have been offering these simplistic solutions that they themselves know are not likely to work. And voters have been expressing their frustration with politicians for decades now.
And
if you watch the steady decline of approval ratings, of Congress being the most famous example, down to 13% or whatever.
Right.
And I think that politicians have somehow maintained this parallel universe existence in which they think that kind of polling doesn't matter.